The MYX II indoor cycling bike is unique and different than a lot of the other indoor cycling bike options on the market. And in today's video, I'm going to give you a walkthrough, show you around this bike, and show you all of the good things and the bad things about the MYX II Fitness Bike. And by the end of this video, I hope that you will be more informed about whether or not the MYX II indoor cycling bike is for you or not. For starters, the first thing you might notice about the MYX II bike is this is a white frame bike, and in comparison, most of the other bikes I've ever reviewed have a black frame. So it's actually quite refreshing to see something a little bit new in the marketplace. However, I should point out you do not have to get the white frame MYX II bike. You can choose to get a black frame. You have two choices, either the white or the black. Regardless of whether you choose the white frame or the black frame, you will get a blue 41-pound flywheel when you buy a MYX II bike. And one thing that makes this drivetrain a little bit different than like the Stride bike or the Peloton Bike Plus is this is actually not a magnetic resistance bike. This is a friction resistance bike, and I'll show you more about that in just a moment. But real quick, before we get into the drivetrain and the flywheel feel, I would like to point out that you do get blue handlebars on the MYX II bike, regardless of whether you get the white frame or the black frame. And unlike the Peloton Bike Plus that does not have the ability to move the handlebars forwards and backwards, the MYX II bike does have the ability to move the handlebars forwards and backwards, as well as up and down. And in addition to the flywheel being blue and the handlebars being blue, the tablet on the MYX II bike is also blue, and it is a 21.5-inch high definition 1080p 360 degree rotating touchscreen. Although it does not quite rotate 360 degrees, this really isn't a problem, I don't think, but I would like to point out that the screen will rotate this far, this direction, and then if you want to go the other way, you rotate it around and it goes almost 360 degrees. So if you want the screen to face completely straight forward, that is not going to happen on the MYX II bike. However, it does get pretty close to straight. Additionally, the screen does rotate to face quite a bit down towards the floor in case you're doing a floor workout. And the tablet can rotate to face really far up. It can actually go completely flat, but I just rotated it that far, for example. And if you know anything about MYX Fitness or the MYX Fitness platform in this bike whatsoever, you'll know that you are not going to be doing Peloton classes on this bike. There are actually two different options you can choose to train with on the MYX II bike, and one of those is OpenFit, and the other is Bodi by BeachBody. Each of these platforms costs $29 per month to join. So in order to use the MYX II bike, you do need to sign up for one of these two platforms in order to use this bike. And I'll show you more about OpenFit and Bodi in just a little bit, but before we do that, let me show you around the mechanics of the bike first. Real quick, I would like to show you that the pedals that come on this bike are a dual-sided pedal that you get a cage on one side, and the other side of the pedal is a SPD clip-in pedal. So regardless of whether you are a very casual rider just hopping on with normal gym shoes or you have clip-in shoes, this bike will work for you. However, I should point out that the pedal diameter is listed as 18 millimeters, whereas the standard pedal diameter is 14.3 millimeters. So in the case that you did want to change out these pedals for different pedals, this bike will not accept your standard 14.3 millimeter pedal axle. These pedals do seem perfectly acceptable, and I think just about anybody riding this bike would be happy with them, but I did want to point that out just in case you were planning on swapping the pedals. So before I start talking about the drivetrain on this bike, I would like to point out that this bike is basically a Star Trek bike, which is a brand that's been around for a really long time, and they are one of the pioneers in the indoor cycling bike arena. So I did review a actual Star Trek brand bike quite a while ago on my channel, and this bike is actually very similar to that bike. However, there are some small differences, and I'll point those out now. But really the point I'm trying to make here is this MYX II bike is based off of a Star Trek bike, which is a brand, a manufacturing company that has been making these bikes for a long time. So this isn't just like a first trial run bike. This bike has a proven track record in history of being reliable and basically a commercial grade bike that's gonna last a long time. So the last Star Trek brand bike I reviewed had a chain driven system. However, this MYX II bike has a belt driven system. I can reach under here and I can actually feel the physical belt. And according to the literature on the website, it is a belt drive 6-groove poly V belt on the bike. And from my experience riding this bike, it is a very smooth feeling drivetrain, but we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Taking a closer look at the resistance system down here, we can see there is actually a leather resistance pad. So this is not a magnetic resistance bike. This is a friction resistance bike. And that friction resistance pad is controlled with your resistance knob right here. And obviously this is a physical resistance knob. And because this is a physical resistance pad bike with a physical resistance knob, that has a couple implications. Since it is a physical resistance knob, you will not have automatic adjusting resistance like on the Peloton Bike Plus, for example. And in addition to that, you will not have a resistance number up on the screen, for example, giving you a resistance number from 0 to 100. And that is one of the main differentiators between the MYX Fitness platform and some of these other platforms like Stride and Peloton, for example. Whereas these other platforms, they give you a resistance number to follow, and the MYX Fitness doesn't really use that system at all. Instead, this is much more of a heart rate focused system to determine how hard you're working. And using a heart rate monitor to determine how hard you're working is actually really intuitive, and it makes a lot of sense. Another implication of having a physical resistance instead of magnetic resistance is physical resistance tends to have a little bit more noise than a magnetic resistance system. However, I should point out, like the Peloton Bike Plus, if you watch any of my videos on that, even though that bike is magnetic resistance, it does produce a whining noise, and there is a noise associated with the Peloton Bike Plus. That being said, the small amount of noise that the MYX II bike does produce, it is very soft and gentle, and it's not by any means loud. So unless you really need a bike that's like 100% silent, I don't think the noise on the MYX II bike will be any problem whatsoever. So since we can't really see in here very well with this cover on there, let's take it off and see what this thing is all about. And there we go. So with this little cover off, we can see the actual physical resistance pad here on the MYX II bike. It is a leather resistance pad, which, you know, in my past experience, a leather resistance pad tends to have a much better drivetrain feel than a wool resistance pad or a felt resistance pad, and they tend to be a little bit more durable as well. Unlike a magnetic resistance bike that basically has no maintenance whatsoever, you will eventually need to replace the leather pad on this bike if you ride this bike long enough. And I would like to talk about the flywheel mass paired up with this physical resistance pad system. So on past bikes, I found that bikes that have a physical resistance pad, they tend to do better when they have a heavier flywheel. And 41-pound flywheel on a bike is really good. And you know, I had a Sunny bike in the past that had like a 48-pound flywheel. That was a good bike. You know, this is like right up there with it. The flywheel mass of the MYX II bike is actually a little bit heavier than the Peloton Bike Plus. And when I ride this bike, it does have a good feeling drivetrain, and I like the way this bike feels to ride. But I'll comment more on that in just a little bit. But for now, with the resistance cover off, I'd like to show you what it sounds like to ride this bike. So that's what the MYX bike sounds like when you ride it, and the drivetrain feels really smooth. One other thing I would like to point out about the physical resistance pad is on some of these bikes with magnetic resistance, you do kind of reach a maximum resistance that the magnets will allow you to achieve. Whereas on a friction resistance pad, usually that max resistance is stronger than the magnetic resistance bikes, and that is true for the MYX II bike. With that leather pad, you can really crank on the resistance and have a super high maximum resistance compared to the Peloton Bike Plus or the Stride bike or any of these other magnetic resistance bikes. So if having a really high maximum resistance is very important to you, then a friction resistance bike may be the way to go. The maximum user weight of the MYX II bike is 350 pounds according to the spec sheet on the website. It does feel like a very sturdy bike and very robust. I do 100% believe this bike can support 350 pounds, possibly even more. Additionally, one of the first things I noticed about the MYX II bike is this thing fits a wide variety of heights. The website lists 4'11" as the minimum user height, and with the forward and backward adjusting handlebars on the MYX II, that really helps accommodate that minimum height. And the maximum height is listed at 6'8". I do not ride this thing on the maximum saddle height, whereas some of these other bikes I ride, so I'm 6'5". A lot of these bikes I have to put the saddle height on maximum height. On the MYX II bike, I do not put this thing on maximum height. And like I said, the handlebars, go forwards and backwards, so it really helps dial in that riding position for short riders and tall riders. The MYX II has 1 through 10 plus maximum for handlebar adjustment height-wise, and the holes are spaced about this far apart. So since there are holes that you click into, you do not get micro adjustments for raising and lowering the handlebars. But since there is a hole to click into, it does kind of, give you a little bit more security in the case that maybe potentially if they were to slide down, not clicking into a hole, clicking into the hole will definitely ensure the handlebars do not slide up and down. However, for moving the handlebars forwards and backwards, there are no holes you click into, so you do get micro adjustments for moving these handlebars forwards and backwards. And the range that they can move forwards and backwards is actually pretty significant. When you get them in place, all you do is tighten this down and they will stay in place. The saddle can also be moved forwards and backwards with micro adjustments, the same way the handlebars can move forwards and backwards, and the saddle can move up and down as well. And as you can see here on the saddle adjustment for up and down wise, you do get these holes spaced about this far apart. Looks to be about 15 millimeters or so. So you don't get micro adjustments for raising and lowering the saddle. However, since they do click into a hole, you're gonna be pretty much for sure this thing is not gonna slide up and down on you. And as I mentioned, I'm 6'5". I ride this thing on saddle height 20, but 20 is not the maximum saddle height. There's actually a significant amount of extra room for me to raise the saddle up. So this bike will easily fit somebody much taller than 6'5", and as I mentioned, 6'8" is the maximum listed height on the website. Also, I would like to point out the adjustment knobs on the MYX II bike are nice, they're soft touch, and it's very easy to lock these things into place. And speaking of adjustment knobs, the resistance knob is blue, just like the flywheel, the handlebars, and the rest of the blue theme, whereas most of these bikes have a red resistance knob, so just something a little bit unique on the MYX II bike. And even though the MYX II bike does not have a magnetic resistance system that gives you a resistance number in terms of 0 to 100 or something like that, it does have a cadence sensor down here, a little sensor on the crank arm. This gives you your cadence, speed, distance, and all the good metrics. So that little cadence sensor down there on the crank arm, in unison with the polar heart rate monitor that comes with the MYX II bike, are your main metrics used to measure your fitness on the MYX II bike. Now currently, at the time of this video, you can buy the standard MYX II package for $1,399, and that comes with the bike, the tablet, the cadence sensor, and the heart rate monitor. But this other stuff you see over here is actually part of a bigger package. It's the $1,599 package. And for that additional amount of money, you get a set of weights. You get 3 weights, and you get to choose which weight levels you would like, as well as a 25-pound kettlebell. And you get a foam roller, an exercise mat, and a stability pad to put underneath the bike. And on top of that, you get this resistance band for more off-bike workouts. So those numbers I just said are the current prices for the MYX II bike. However, there is a link below this video in the description box that will give you all of the current prices and if there's any promotions going on right now to help save you money. Additionally, if you did buy through that link below this video, it would help support this channel. So if you're planning on buying the MYX II bike and you would like to help support this channel, If you did buy through that link below the video, it would help support this channel and I would greatly appreciate it. So before I get on this bike and explain my thoughts and feel on the drivetrain feel, I would like to point out the Q factor on this bike, which is the distance between the pedals. The crank arm distance is listed at 165 millimeters, whereas on the Peloton Bike Plus over here, the Q factor on that bike is 170 millimeters. So in general, the Q factor on this bike is a little bit more narrow than a lot of the other exercise bikes out there I've reviewed. For me personally, I like the Q factor of this bike and it feels perfectly normal and acceptable. One other thing I would like to point out about the MYX II bike is the speakers are located on the back of the bike. So instead of having speakers that are going to be forward facing and have that sound super clear facing directly at you on the front of the tablet, they are located on the back of the tablet. You can hear the sound, it's perfectly acceptable. However, it always just sounds better when you have the speakers on the front of the tablet facing you. And yeah, the speakers are just on the back of this bike, so just be aware of that. So I'm about to hop on this bike and give you my impressions of the drivetrain feel and all of that stuff. But right down here, before we enter the ride, I want to show you that it gives you your heart rate here right on the screen after you hook up the polar heart rate monitor. And then you can choose, which I had no problem hooking that up whatsoever. Super easy, straightforward. And then you can choose to add headphones if you don't want to listen to the built-in audio. So to do that, basically all you got to do is click on that. And for me, I have some AirPods here. So let me see if I can do this with one hand, take these out and get them to pair up. If you're having any trouble hooking up your AirPods Pro, basically you just have to hold down this button on the back of the case and then they should come right up there. So yeah, you just hook them up and they're good to go. Then you just put them on and you click the play now button and the class will start right up. And as you can see, the heart rate is displayed right on the screen there and the audio is streaming right through my earbuds. So everything's ready to roll. Once you start pedaling, the cadence, speed, and distance and all that stuff shows up here, as well as calories burned. Down here on the right of the screen, there is a course duration time there. You cannot move it forward or skip around in the class. However, you can pause it. You can choose to leave the workout or resume workout. And those are your options there. You can slightly minimize the screen here if you want to see this data more clearly with a black background. And right down here, I have the AirPods in. I'm hearing just the instructor, but I can slide this over and add in a little bit of music or all music and no instructor. And yeah. So now what I'm going to do is just kind of hop on the bike and just kind of pedal it out a little bit and explain the drivetrain feel and how I feel about the ride quality of this bike. So first thing, hopping on the bike, has my heart rate monitor right up here. All of the cadence, speed and distance and stuff, it starts displaying that cadence as soon as you start pedaling. So right now, it's showing me cadence of 90, consistent just here. Moving along, shows my speed at 16 miles an hour. And there's no resistance on right now. There's no way for me to know that by looking at the screen. I can just hear that the friction pad is not touching the flywheel. So, I'm just kind of coasting, but I can turn it to the right and start to add on a little bit of resistance. And, you can tell by the sound of the leather pad touching the flywheel that there's some resistance on there, and I can feel it in my legs a little bit. So like I mentioned before, instead of using a system like other bikes like the Peloton or other bikes that have like an exact number for resistance on the screen, MYX Fitness, the OpenFit platform, and Bodi is a lot more focused on heart rate zone training. So the heart rate metric is going to be your main metric on the MYX Fitness machine. So with the bike on a very low resistance, the flywheel and drivetrain of this bike feels really nice to ride. That heavy 41-pound flywheel, which I mentioned, is slightly heavier than the Peloton Bike Plus, I believe. It really has a nice momentum to it as I pedal. And what I mean by that is, like, if I were to hop out of the saddle, it helps me maintain a consistent cadence with that heavy flywheel. And the other thing is, if I were to apply backward resistance to the pedal, you can just see and feel that the momentum of that flywheel really carries a good amount of momentum, and what that does is result in a nice feeling smooth drivetrain. So as I begin to add on a little bit more resistance here, one turn to the right made pretty significant difference. And you know, there is no power output on this screen because it doesn't measure your resistance, so it can't give you your power output. But you can see your heart rate climb, and you know, that's the main metric that MYX Fitness uses. So giving it another turn here, I can feel the resistance going up even more, obviously. And then another turn and it's getting pretty heavy. Now this resistance is pretty heavy, so I'm gonna stop pedaling so I can actually talk. What a lot of bikes that have a light flywheel, the problem that they have if it's a friction resistance bike and a light flywheel, as you put on more resistance, it'll begin to feel really choppy on bikes with a light flywheel. This 41-pound flywheel does not feel choppy as I add on resistance. So for example, I reviewed a Yosuda bike and also a Sunny bike. They are very different friction resistance bikes. The Yosuda had a pretty light flywheel, and the resistance felt super choppy when you started adding on more resistance, whereas the Sunny bike that had a heavy flywheel is like a 48-pound flywheel, I believe. That resistance did not feel choppy at all. So on a friction resistance bike, this 41-pound flywheel works really well for it. And as I add on resistance, it still feels pretty smooth towards the higher end of resistances. So right now, I'd say my resistance is at about the equivalent of about 60 to 70 on the Peloton Bike Plus. If I add on even more and bump it up to like what, this is probably about 90 on the Peloton Bike Plus. Like, it still feels like relatively smooth because of that heavy flywheel with presumably good bearings and all of that stuff. And then of course the nice thing, or maybe not so nice thing, is you can actually crank up the resistance to be like far higher than what you could get on the Peloton Bike Plus. Like you could bring these pedals like so, it would just come to a complete stop like this. So if you're an individual that's looking for a indoor cycling bike that has a particularly high maximum resistance, a friction resistance bike may be the way to go for you because the friction resistance can just outperform a magnetic resistance bike in terms of the maximum resistance. So how smooth is it as you crank it up? Well, this is like pretty high resistance, you know, I'd say about 90 or over like 100% of the Peloton Bike Plus. And honestly, like as long as I keep the pedals moving, this feels pretty smooth. Like even at this resistance, which is super, super high, well beyond the maximum of the Peloton Bike Plus, like I can still do like a climb. And it really does kind of feel like an actual climb on a road bike outside. Whew. So there is no number up there on the screen for resistance level or power output, but my heart rate is up. It's at 138 right now. So that gives me a really good indication that this bike is making me work. Okay, heart rate has recovered slightly, bumping it down to like a medium resistance. You know, it produces a little bit of noise, but it's not like really loud by any means. And it's a really good feeling drivetrain. It's very smooth. You know, like I mentioned, the Star Trek brand has been around for a long time. They've been making quality bikes for a long time. And this one appears to be right on par with all of the other stuff they've ever made. And with the bike on very low resistance or no resistance at all, with that 41-pound flywheel, if you watch me go and throw my mass into the pedal, you can see there's a little bit of a delay there to get it going because of that heavy flywheel, and it makes for a nice ride. So to show you around OpenFit a little bit here, this is the main dashboard when you log in, and then down at the bottom you have subcategories here, whether you want to do just a ride or if you want to do cross training, which would be basically like a ride and then having some strength or something else worked into it. There's also programs. So like an entire program you can decide to follow for an extended period of time. And then workouts, different kind of stuff like strength training and just various different things there. So for the off-bike workouts, I really like the instructor-led classes. The instructors are very clear and they really have you focus on good form to make sure you're not gonna get injured. So that's really nice. And then obviously, like I said before, how you can turn on or off the music so you can tune more into what the instructor has to say. And then you got the heart rate right up on there and they give you recommended ranges that you're trying to stay in, whether that be zone 1, zone 2, depending on the workout. But to make a long story short, the instructor-led workouts are very useful, very high quality, high production value, and they're really good. And at the end of your workout, they give you a little summary here with the amount of time you spent in the workout, your heart rate, max heart rate, estimated calories burned, as well as your heart rate zones right here on a graph. You also have an ability to rate your workout. So here's my final thoughts on the MYX II bike. So in terms of the physical build of the bike, I feel like it's a very high quality bike. Obviously it's by Star Trek, who's been around. They've been in the game for a long time, making these things for a long time. They have a lot of experience. They put out quality products, and this feels like a quality product. It is not magnetic resistance. It's a friction resistance bike, but with that 41-pound flywheel, feels like it has good bearings. It feels like a really nice feeling drivetrain. I really like that you can get this bike in white. You don't have to get it in white, but it's just something kind of a little bit different from a lot of the other bikes out there that we see in matte black. I also think the blue is a nice touch on the handlebars. The saddle is blue, the flywheel is blue, and the resistance knob is blue. It really just makes it look unique and nice. Another thing I really like the MYX II bike is this is a 4-way adjustable bike, and you can move the handlebars forwards and backwards, and that option is not available on a lot of the bikes out there on the market right now. And in addition to that, it can fit a wide variety of heights down from like 4'11" all the way to 6'8". I can easily fit on this bike at 6'5", so height isn't an issue on the MYX II bike. The 360 rotating tablet, technically from the one I have here, is not fully 360 degrees rotating. However, it is sufficient. It goes almost 360 degrees as I displayed earlier in this video. As far as the actual touchscreen, it's beautiful, it's snappy and responsive, and a high quality 1080p touchscreen, and it's good. The Q factor on this bike is 165 millimeters, which is about 5 millimeters smaller Q factor than the Peloton bike. For me, it works perfectly fine and is acceptable. If you do choose to get the MYX II bike, you do have to commit to at least one of the 2 platforms, either OpenFit or Bodi by BeachBody. Each are $29 per month, and you can get a free trial for each one of them. So if you're getting this bike and you want to do Peloton rides, for example, you're not going to be able to load up the Peloton on this tablet. This is not an open platform bike, so you do have to sign up for one of the platforms that cost $29 per month with the MYX II bike. As far as the purchase price of the MYX II bike goes, right now at the time of this recording, it is about $1,400 for the bike's basic package, which includes the bike, the tablet, the cadence sensor, and the heart rate monitor. And if you want to get the weights, that is the plus package for the MYX II bike. That includes weights, the resistance band, the foam roller, exercise mat, stabilizer mat. I do have a link below this video in the description box. I don't have any promises on what the current prices are. They could be changing. There could be discounts going on. So check out the link below this video to see if there are any discounts or promotions. Additionally, if you are planning on buying the MYX II bike and you would like to help support this channel, if you do buy through the link below this video, that would help support this channel at no additional cost to you, and I would greatly appreciate your support. Also, I should mention there is a 30-day risk-free trial period with the MYX II bike. So if you want to try it out for like a month and you decide you don't like it, they do have a return policy. On top of that, there is a 1-year warranty on the bike, and there is full service delivery, so the delivery team will bring the bike to you and set everything up for you in your home, so you don't got to worry about building it. So overall, I like the MYX II bike. It's a nice ride. I like the OpenFit classes, and it seems like a very smooth and seamless experience. It's a good bike, and if you're considering, if you're on the fence of whether or not you want to buy the MYX II bike, I do give this bike a thumbs up. I enjoy it, I like it, it's a quality machine, and if you're on the fence, I'd say go for it. So if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. Any questions or comments you have, please leave down below the video. Click that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in my next video.